as well. Hello, Nancy. Hello, Brandon.
Hi.
How are you? Welcome to Virtual Warwicks. Nancy, I know that you are in the city. I think you're in like the Del Mar area of San Diego.
I'm in Del Mar, yes.
Okay, so not too far up from where Warwicks is. I'm actually in Carlsbad, so I'm a little bit north of you. So we've got San Diego covered. Brandon, where are you calling in from?
From New York. I just moved here.
Oh, really? Where did you move there from?
I moved to the city from Iowa. So I was living in the Midwest for about 4 or 5, well, since 2013, so almost a decade.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm in the big city.
I love
Big
that.
change.
Brandon, your microphone might be scratching against your sweater. Okay. So it just might be, there you go. That might be better. I was just getting a little bit of feedback there. Oh my goodness, to go from Iowa to New York, talk about a difference.
Yeah, quite the difference. Quite the difference. Yeah.
So we have the two coasts covered. So hopefully we have some people that are joining us in between the coasts here. While Facebook's letting everybody know that we're live, I'm just going to fill a little bit of airtime telling everybody what's going to happen here tonight. And my little sign there, got to talk about Warwicks for a second. Little sign there says 1896. We're celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. Yes. So
wow.
I thank you. Yes. We're not the oldest bookstore in the country, but the oldest continuously family owned. So Nancy Warwick is our 4th generation owner. She's at the store all the time. Come in. She's fantastic. She's got a beautiful store. So if you're in the San Diego area, we would love for you to come by the store. I'm going to put a link into the comment section for both Nancy's book and Brandon's book. So you can click on that link and choose to pick it up in the store if you're in San Diego. And Nancy's going to come and sign some books, I think, for us in the next couple of days. So there might be some signed stock. If you do order there and you want a signed book, make sure you put that in the notes comment. Or we could ship it to you. So I like to say any way there is to get a book, you can actually get it from Warwicks. We actually can ship. Independent bookstores can ship. So support we would love you to support Warwicks, but wherever you're at, support your independent bookstores. Speaking of the comment section, go ahead. Brandon and Nancy are going to talk for about 30-35 minutes. They have a lot to talk about. I was in the green room with them. There was some really good conversation going on in the green room, so it's going to be a great conversation tonight. But go ahead and put your questions into the comment section, and I'll pop those into them at about that 35-minute mark. We love audience questions, so don't be shy about that. I think I've given Facebook enough time to let people know we're here. So let me introduce these two wonderful people and I will get off the screen. Short bios. I like to do a short bio, so I hope you two don't mind that I do a short bio. Nancy Goldstone grew up in Illinois, went to Cornell University, where she graduated with a BA in history, hence all of the great books that she wrote, and at Columbia University, where she took a master's degree at the School of International Affairs. She is the author of 6 previous books, and also co-authored 5 books with her husband, Lawrence. And like we said earlier, she lives in Del Mar here in California. She's here today to talk to us about her latest book, In the Shadow of the Empress, The Defiant Lives of Maria Theresa, mother of Marie Antoinette, and her daughters. Whew, cannot wait for this conversation. And with her today is Brandon Taylor. Brandon is the author of the instant national bestseller short story collection, Filthy Animals, and the novel Real Life, which was a New York Times editor's choice and shortlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize. You two have a wonderful conversation. I can't wait. See you in about a half hour.
See you.
Bye.
Bye. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Brandon. So this is our first time meeting. I'm so great to meet you. And I just have to say, hi to all my friends and family who are out there. I miss you so much. Okay, now we can go. I'm very professional.
I love that. Well, I also really love this book. I think it might be my favorite book of the year. I mean, it is just, that in some sense, that's not a surprise. Very often your books, when I get them, are my favorite books of the year. It really is true that, I love their scope, their scale, the intimate little secrets you manage to find somehow. They're full of texture and surprise and marvels, and I love them so much. And this book was no surprise. This book was no different. It was just fantastic.
Thank you so much.
I guess I'd like to start with a little bit of a broad question, if that's okay.
Sure.
So as a history nerd, I of course know about Maria Theresa, but I feel like, in America especially, she's maybe not as well known in the sort of public imagination or the cultural imagination. So could you tell us a little bit about who Maria Theresa was and like why her story appealed to you?
Oh, I knew I was going to write about Maria Theresa for like 4 books back because her story just really got me. Maria Theresa was the only woman ever to inherit the vast Habsburg Empire in her own name, which means that when her father died, he had no sons, and she was only 23 years old. She was pregnant. He gave her no experience at all in government, and he dies, and all the other major European powers decide that a woman is too weak or to protect her subjects or her lands and shouldn't be allowed to rule. And they all attack her at the same time from every direction. And I just love her because she never gave up, and she ended up whacking them back and went on to rule for 40 years. And during that time, read every paper that passed her desk. She had her own council. She was so involved in every aspect of government. And she had 16 children in 20 years. And we think that we multitask. I mean, she was just amazing. She's like, get pregnant, have the baby, work up to the moment of delivery, have the baby, and the next morning she'd be at her desk. She was phenomenal.
Oh, it just boggles the mind. That's an extraordinary number of children to have, but then you couple that with running a household, running multiple nations, negotiating fraught, like geopolitical.
Like, this is what she had. She had Vienna, she had Austria, she was Archduchess of Austria, Queen of Bohemia, Queen of Hungary. She had oversaw the Austrian Netherlands, which was Belgium and Flanders. She had large parts of Italy, and she oversaw all of Germany. I mean, this is a lot of territory, and she did it.
I mean, it's phenomenal. How is one person even able, and I think that, sometimes we lose sight of the fact of how, when people think of like the empire or the Habsburg dominions, they imagine it to be like this culturally homogenous like domain, and it was not, right? Like, it was this complicated set of cultures, and each nation with its own history, and sometimes those histories were ones of conflict. Like, Bavaria and Hungary are just never going to be friends. Like,
in Hungary alone, they spoke so many different languages that the only way that the Austrians communicated with them was in Latin, which is a dead language. So it was so many different peoples. Everybody's on a different time schedule. Everybody has a different way of doing things. I mean, but she really held it all together, which was amazing. But the thing about that I really liked about, and I want to get to your stuff because I think we have a lot in common with this. And by the way, if you don't know, Filthy Animals is just excellent and just searing. These stories are searing. They're wonderful. But the War of the Austrian Succession was really, which was the one where they all attacked her and she won them. That was all about whether a woman should not be allowed to rule a kingdom, to rule the empire, or to rule a kingdom. That was one of the reasons. But the other reason was because a king was not supposed to be gay, because her major nemesis was Frederick the Great, and he had a very he was born gay, and his father was just horrible to him, and it was one of the most abusive stories that I've ever run into. But because of that, Frederick spent the rest of his life, I think, trying to prove that he was a better king than his father. And he did that by attacking Maria Theresa and trying to expand his territory. So this is a war, which you'll never hear in a classroom. But really, this is the war because two different kinds of people tried to hold power than was usual, and everybody went at it from there.
Oh, I love that. I mean, And for all of you listening out there, that's one of the great things about a Nancy Goldstone book, is that she brings the people forward, and well, I'm talking about you like you're not even here, but like you humanize, you make these rulers into people, and you show the ways that their individual human psychologies affect their abilities to rule, and more on that later. But I guess I want to talk a little bit more about the War of Austrian Succession, which is, I feel like, one of the great deck reshuffles of European history. Like, it just completely, like, the ways the alliances changed and shifted. It was like something out of Stendhal, or like one of the great novels. It was so, as I was reading the book, I simply could not believe that they had misbehaved so badly. And I do feel like in American history classes, we don't learn a lot about the War of Austrian Succession, even though it's like it directly leads to the conflicts that gave us World Wars I and II.
Exactly.
Not to mention the stuff in the Balkans. Like, it's just one of the great pressure points of history. And so could you tell us just like a little bit more about the War of Austrian Succession and stuff like that?
One of the great things also about when I write about stuff for Americans is, because none of us know or ever taught this, no one can tell who's going to win. So there's a lot of tension when you're writing about it. But what happened here was that I told you Frederick the Great. So Frederick the Great decides to, as soon as Maria Theresa inherits her kingdom, which is like in November, in November of 1740, I think it was. And within 8 days of her inheriting this property, Frederick has already, he's king of Prussia, he's king of Prussia. And Prussia up to this point has been nothing. They've been this little regional, they're nothing. They're not really a regional power, but his father had left him this huge army, which he had never used, and lots of money. And Frederick decided to use it. And so within 8 days of Maria Theresa inheriting, Frederick has already got his army together. He's got his plan for attack. He knows how he's going to attack her. And he's got his general, and he's about to go and do it all the time. But all the time he's getting ready, he's professing to be on her side. And of course, he'll help her and all this stuff. And the next thing she knows, he's just walked in and taken a large portion of her territory, Silesia, which is a little north of Vienna. So, and when he does that, and they have a battle, and Frederick, I have to say, you got to love Frederick, because he does, all historians love Frederick, because not only does he double deal and double cross and is completely amoral and everything like that, but he always does it with just this great sardonic one-liner. And so they have the battle, and really this should have been in the end of Frederick, because this was Frederick's first battle. He goes into battle with the Austrians. He leads his own cavalry charge, and the Austrians come and charge at him. And he gets so scared that he runs completely away from the battle. He gets on his horse and just charges away and ends up in a mill somewhere miles away, hiding out. But his general stays, and his general wins the battle. So after the battle is over, they have to go and find Frederick and bring him back, all covered with fame and flour, as they said. But he had won the battle. So Maria Theresa now and because he had won the battle, all of a sudden, boom, that's when you won a battle in the 18th century, you got a lot of allies. So all of a sudden he gets France, which is a huge power on his side to invade. He gets Bavaria and Saxony and all these other places. Spain is going to end up going on against Maria Theresa also. Everybody's coming against her. It's not England. They stayed out of it for a while. But everybody is coming against her. And she has no soldiers anymore. She's just lost this territory. Everyone's telling her to just make peace and give it up. And she has no money. And what she does is, she's just so smart about this. She's also going to be queen of Hungary. And now the Hungarians, she has all these old advisors around her, and they were her father's advisors. And they were afraid of the Hungarians because the Hungarians are very rebellious, and they said, don't go to Hungary. No, they'll just as soon shoot you as help you. She goes to Hungary.
You. There's that whole thing about cannibalism as well.
She goes to Hungary, and she shows them such respect. She goes in Hungarian colors. She goes through the entire coronation ceremony with them, which involves her getting on a horse, charging up a hill, and waving a big sword in 4 directions. That's a filmable moment if I ever saw one. And then she goes to their diet, and she holds up her son, which she had just had. It was her 4th child. She finally had a son, and she holds him up in front of the diet and says, "This is my pledge. If you will just help me, I will, this is a sign that I will be there for you always." And all the Hungarians just love her, and they vote her this huge army. And the Hungarians, they were tough guys. Those guys were tough. And the second that the Hungarians walked into it, all the French and the Bavarians are like, I'm not sure I want to fight them. And it changed the whole character of the war. And she ended up winning.
Oh, it's one of those great, as you say, like cinematic moments where she has nowhere to turn. She has nothing to do. And so she turns to the most unlikely of allies, these like the hostile bedfellows of Hungary,
tough, good fighters,
and she shows them like love and humility. And she's like, "I am your queen. Please help me.
Please save me."
And they did. It just mind blowing.
Yeah.
One of the great cinematic moments in history. But of course that war would go on. That war would dog her. Like Frederick is just a perpetual thorn in her side.
He does get to keep Silesia, and he does come out of this better, but he had a lot of luck. But he was also, you have to feel sorry for him, but because of how he was raised, but he really took that running. And that's what I would say about, in the characters in your book, for example. I was once reading in history, they don't always look at who people are individually, right? I remember I read this biography of Louis IX a long time ago, and it was an excellent, Louis IX was King of France in the 13th century. It was an excellent biography. And, it's really hard to do that kind of stuff back into the 13th century because most of the records are gone. You have to be very careful. But the guy did write, and this is typical of historians over the centuries. He said, well, we don't have a lot on Louis IX's early life, but really, what does it matter how someone was raised as a child, what happened to them in childhood or young adulthood, or how their parents treated them? And I was like, I'm not sure I agree with your police work there, Norm. I think it really, really matters. And in your stories, I think a lot of the characters are dealing with stuff that happened to them when they were younger. And it's on an individual scale, right? It's personal, and you feel it, but when it happens to someone who's a monarch, it affects everybody. It affects history. And that's what I look at, I think.
Oh yeah, and it's so, Frederick is a great example of this because, like the book is about Maria Theresa and it's about her daughters, and you do this fantastic thing with the structure. But then there's like an almost an interlude where we just kind of pause and we go back to the beginning of Frederick's life, and we see how he was like this sensitive, like very happy, like lovely little child and then his father broke him. There's that horrifying story of like what happened when he tried to escape and then he was caught, and it's just so harrowing. And then, and it's not heavy-handed at all. You just sort of show us these things that happened to him. And then you're like, is it any wonder that he ends up?
And he was very, very smart guy and very talented, and he just didn't get to be who he wanted to be. And that changed history because Prussia becomes this huge force then. And it's that attitude that go out and take other people's property and go out and try and take over as much property as you can, that's going to lead to World War I and World War II. They are following Frederick. He becomes this wonderful image to them. It's just that's what happened. And all from that in childhood.
I
So
mean, and like one of the more brutal childhoods
I know.
in history. And you tell that story so beautifully. I guess that leads me to my next question, which is that, like the book is about Maria Theresa, but it's also about her daughters,
Right.
and I guess you've used this form and structure before with Daughters of the Winter Queen, your previous book. I guess I wonder, like, like I was thinking back to what I learned about Maria Theresa in school, and it was often like, yes, Maria Theresa, but really we're going to talk about Joseph. We're going to talk about her son. He's the emperor. He matters. They were co-regnate, and all this other stuff. And we don't, so it is possible to like learn a lot about the late Habsburgs and not even realize that Marie Antoinette was a Habsburg, because nobody talks about the daughters. Like nobody talks about the daughters. And you do this great job of like following the daughters.
Thank you.
And tracing not just the daughters, but the effects of Maria Theresa's upbringing of them, and the political ramifications that, like, what happens when these women become queens and duchesses with like Maria Theresa like as a mother. Like, it is so amazing. So I guess could you tell us a little bit about why you chose to focus on the daughters, and could you tell us a little bit about the ways in which like having Maria Theresa as a mother like changed world history in amazing ways?
So I've done this for a while. I a couple of books back, I really, actually from my first book, I realized that if you're going to follow somebody, if you can follow them into the next generation, that's when you really see what happened. Because if you just end with one person, you don't see the follow through. You don't see how the effects of that person's reign really play out later. And so that's why I followed the daughters, but also I followed the daughters because these daughters were amazing. And I am embarrassed to admit that although I knew I knew intellectually that Maria Theresa had all these children, and obviously Marie Antoinette would have had sisters, I never even thought really about Marie Antoinette having sisters, because Marie Antoinette is such a huge figure. She takes all the oxygen out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody even considers, whereas she really had her sisters were actually far more interesting than she was, and were really excellent at what they did at ruling, much more so than she was. And I focus on two of her sisters. There were 7 sisters altogether, and some of them died. But these were the ones I follow, people who have power. I'm very interested in women in power. And the ones who had power were Maria Christina, who was one of the older sisters, she was Governor General of Hungary, and later she was Governor General of the Austrian Netherlands. So she actually had to fight the forces of the French Revolution also. And Maria Carolina, who was the sister closest in age, Marie Antoinette was the youngest. She was the baby, she was the pet, she was the spoiled one. But the one closest in age to her was Maria Carolina, who was Charlotte. And Maria Carolina's story is, we all hear about Marie Antoinette, only 14 years old, sent to Versailles, has to go through, has to take off all her clothes at the border and get redressed and all of this stuff. Maria Carolina had it so much worse. Maria Carolina was only 15, and she got sent off to Italy, to Naples, to marry the king of Naples, this guy, Ferdinand. And believe me, you did not want to be married to Ferdinand. I mean, Marie Antoinette, when it takes her a long time to have to consummate the marriage. Maria Carolina, she gets to Naples, and that night at 15, and being Maria Theresa's daughter, it's like being raised in a convent. I mean, there was no interaction really with other men other than your brothers. She has to have sex right away she has to consummate the marriage right away with this guy, Ferdinand. And Ferdinand is juvenile on an extreme level. Ferdinand would have the servants come in while he was going to the bathroom, and then he would chase them around with the stuff in the chamber pot. He would let rats loose in the castle to scare his guests. When he went hunting, he went out and put birds in his pockets, dead birds, and brought them. I mean, he was just a mess. And she had to deal with that. So her early life was much harder. It was much harder for her than it was for Marie Antoinette. And then on top of that, she had to face Maria Carolina, the Queen of Naples, had to face Napoleon, who was, that was first the French Revolution, then Napoleon. And he was, and she had to fight him, and she did. So these other women were very powerful, and I really admired them and how they were under pressure.
Oh, I mean, I felt like in some ways like this book could have been 4 books. like each one could have been its own book because it was so fascinating. And the stuff with Ferdinand and Naples, and like the way that she just like clawed her way,
Right.
and like, I mean, was truly incredible. I mean, it was fantastic stuff. I guess I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the way that you use research to create these incredibly vivid portraits, because as we've alluded to here, like the book is like we go to Austria, we go to Hungary, we go to Naples, we go to Parma, we go to France, we go to the Netherlands, we go to Prussia with Frederick. Like in each place, it never feels like it's a person against a static backdrop. The entire sort of socio-political history of the place just comes to life.
Oh,
and these like vivid scenes, it's like something out of that movie Anastasia, where the portraits come to life and everyone is dancing and you're living among it. I guess how did you create these incredibly vivid portraits of these places and these characters and the ne'er-do-wells, the scamps, and all the intrigue?
I first of all, thank you for that. But I love the research. The research is like the best part of the whole thing. And I read through all of their letters. Most of these letters were in French. Oh my goodness. Like every night I just sit there and translate that French, and I'm very slow and I'm very poor at it. And so it would take me a long time. Like my husband's like, you're not going to translate again tonight, are you? But eventually when you read their letters and you start to hear their voice, then you get a sense of who they are, and they will tell you who they are. The hardest person to crack was Maria Christina, who goes by Mimi, because she was very, very proper and restrained in her letters. But there came a point when something really happens to her, then she cracks. Then she starts to say who she is. You know, when she had to flee Brussels, and she didn't want to flee Brussels. She wanted to stay there, and she was forced to flee Brussels, and she was furious at having to go, and she just let out who she was. And that was a really excellent moment. And sometimes when I'm writing, I have to go through the ambassador report. You've got to go through all these different primary sources, but that's the whole fun. It's this wonderful world that they live large. You know, I sit in this little room and I read, and they live larger than any of us. Somebody's always having to escape on a horse in front of the fleeing the army, or in a ship, or whatever it is. Or they're having an amazing party with these gorgeous dresses and these beautiful jewels. And you get to hear what they had for dinner. I loved it. That's why I do it.
Oh.
See, when you're writing in fiction, you have to do that, but you have to make it up. I mean, that's to me so much harder.
Well, I mean, it can be difficult, but one of the things, so I've read a lot of history, and what always strikes me about your books is that they never, like, you do the research, and so the books feel incredibly tied to like these real things, but it never feels dry, Nancy. Like it feels like it's like I'm reading someone's diary. It feels
that's because I read all the really dry stuff, and I summarize it. Believe me, lots of the reports are dry, but it's interesting to know you always have these. This is a fascinating time, 18th century. Voltaire. Everyone from Voltaire to Casanova, when Goethe, when these people walk into the room, walk into my story, I'm like, oh, here's Goethe. I think I'll see what he had to say. And they always have something wonderful to say. So that's who you want to follow. And they're living it. They don't know what's going to happen. So they communicate that to you. And to me, it's wow. That's the best part.
You know, it sounds, I mean, it really does sound like we have very similar things, because I too find myself, I am mostly just following characters. I feel that
I could tell from your stories. Do you ever say to them, no, there's so many times when I'm going, I go, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Did your characters?
Yes. Yeah, all the time, and you know, it's interesting, like there are some moments in the book that I was familiar with, like from reading other histories, and so I would know how it would turn out, and I would still be like, no, you can still go back, and I feel like that's a real testament to how alive the people are in this book. And I guess
thank you.
To ask you another question about the research really quickly. So when you're doing the research, are you just looking for those little points when the interesting stuff, or are you just like looking at it all?
No, I'm looking at everything. I read everything I can possibly get my hand, because I'm ignorant about a lot of this. I want to know. And the whole thing about why I write these books, I'm really curious. I would like to know what really happened. And often when I read other history books, I don't feel like I got what really happened. And I have to go back to the primary sources and just keep going and going. If I don't, like Marie Antoinette, I never understood her story. I never expected when I wrote this book that I would have anything new to say about Marie Antoinette, because she's been done to death, right? But no, you know, the second you start to really look at it, because I only look at Marie Antoinette, I start to look, as I always do, at the court around her, and especially the husband. And I look at Louis the 16th for 10 minutes, and you can see that there's something going on here. And really, I came up with, and it smacks you in the face, that he was born with autism spectrum disorder. Well, when you have somebody like that, who is so different, very intelligent guy, well-meaning, whatever, but couldn't look anyone in the eye, never hardly spoke, couldn't speak before people, in front of people, had to have a routine, had all these physical characteristics that were weird. You see why suddenly everything in the French Revolution makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it was that part I found it like really daring on your part to sort of bring all of that into the book, because normally I always feel like historians are always like trying to do like a quick in and out when it comes to, like, I feel like books either focus too much or too little on that particular part of like the sort of late Bourbon catastrophes, and they tend to really want to get quickly to Robespierre and the Reign of Terror. And I feel like you really do such a great job of like bringing those people to life. Like I'd never read about Louis the 16th in that way before. I'd never read about Marie Antoinette in that way before. Like, honestly, like I always feel like, oh, who cares about Marie Antoinette? We all know, like, she got the champagne cups and the boat hat hair, and she's whatever. It's the, après-moi, the deluge. Like, I get it. But reading this book, I was like, oh, right, she was a person. She was a person. And also like reading those horrifying letters that Maria Theresa was sending her. I'm like, oh my God.
Right.
She's got the most overbearing, intense mother, and she's got to like lead France, like the world superpower.
Right.
I mean, but I just found it so fascinating and so rich, and I feel like you really changed my whole outlook on Marie Antoinette. Nancy, I want to ask you, this might be a chaotic thing for me to say, but I feel like all of your books make this really compelling case that like history is really just a story about love, because your books so often pivot on like marriages and families and affairs and unrequited loves and the griefs of losing those that we love most, and love of country and love of fellow citizens. And your books so often come down to love. And like, that's why I often like find myself getting really moved when I read them, especially a book like this one, which is so full of love. And I guess like love is like a really difficult thing to write about in a historical context, right?
Well, sometimes it's mostly it's the absence of love also that makes people, but those are the fundamental emotions that move people. And that's the thing about inherited monarchy. When you do inherited monarchy, you're going to get whoever that is on top. You cannot change that person. There's no legitimate way to change the monarch unless you know, or chase them away. And a lot of them are just trying to live, you know,
Yeah.
and to get over whatever happened to them in their childhood. And and they're just people. They're, you know, they dress them up, but they're just people. So
yeah.
And I love my characters. So they're like all my dead girlfriends, long dead girlfriends.
And they do feel like characters richly told and brought to life. And yeah, I mean, your books are just, they're full of love and intrigue and drama and so much fun. Thank
you.
That was such a great, you two could talk for another hour, I think.
We need a bottle of wine is what we need.
Yeah, me, Nancy, and the 18th century. It'll be great.
But it's also, I mean, it's just, you know, these strong women, it's like, and what, I mean, there's so much to unpack on all of it. It's like, why aren't there like women in that kind of control now?
Right.
You know, and there's just so much, but we've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'm not going to talk. So we have a question from Jillian. So we actually got a couple. So this is from Jillian to you, Nancy. How many countries did you travel for your research and tackle the language challenges? And how did COVID influence your research?
Well, first of all, COVID came, I worked on this book for 4 years, and COVID came in the last 2, basically. And I traveled before that. I've been to Vienna, I've been to Naples, I've been to France, but you don't, and when you do your research now, you don't actually, I never touch the letters or anything like that. A lot of them, they're all scanned. They're all, because if every historian touched every letter that they wanted to, they would all disintegrate. So they were very smart about that. And they've, especially in France, they've got them all published, and you have to be really careful anyway, because there was a thriving business in forged Marie Antoinette letters. So you've got to be really careful about which ones you're using or not. But I am actually embarrassed to say that I needed the worldwide pandemic in order to finish this book on time, because it was an overwhelming, it does go to so many places. I did give out the German. I did the French myself, but I gave out the German to a wonderful, I wouldn't have been able to do it without her. She was just a wonderful translator. But Maria Theresa married a French person, and Francis of Lorraine, and he wasn't French, but he spoke French. And he wasn't she could do any language. She could learn any language, but Francis could only speak French. So she made the whole court, and everybody, all the children, everybody just learned French. So they all wrote to each other in French later. Every letter that comes out is French. It's in French. So that part that's the part I did, which was the slow, you know. But that's how you hear their voice. So there's no other way to do it. You can't hand out that. But the German stuff, there were a couple of Germans. There were strong sections of German translation I needed, and I had a wonderful Barbara Ann. She did this great, Schmutzler. She did this great job for me.
Okay. So Brandon, when we were talking in the green room, you talked about how you were introduced to Nancy's books when you were working in a lab. Is that what you? And you listened to them?
Yes. So. In my previous life, I was a biomedical researcher. I studied stem cells, and I would be in lab late at night, like working, doing things with my hands. And so I wanted something to sort of keep my interest. And I'd always kind of liked history as a student in undergrad and stuff like that. And I played this game called Crusader Kings 2, which was like, you know, started in 1066 and would go into like the 1500s. And so I liked history, but I hadn't read very much about it. And so I was just sort of clicking around one day, and I found one of Nancy's books and downloaded it on Audible and listened to it and fell in love with her just like spellbinding ability to tell a story, and then quickly got all of them and read them. And yeah, and so her books would keep me company in the sort of long, dark Midwestern winter nights while I was pipetting. And
you describe so well in your stories. And
I love it.
I'm from the Midwest, I know.
Oh, so you know all about it, Nancy.
So Nancy, so who reads your book? Who read in the Audible? Who reads your books? Do you read them, or
the publisher picks somebody, and I couldn't do. I mean, I do it in home, and I read it to myself when I'm writing. Do you read your stuff out loud? I always read my stuff out loud.
Oh yeah, I have to. I have to.
Otherwise, it's not just on the page. You have to listen to how the poetry of how the words go, the music of the words. Yeah.
And I could tell that you did, because the writing is so clean and so lively, and it does feel like it's meant to be told, because it has that feeling of like a really great story that just like
Thank you.
Like the oral history,
the copy editor. Your copy editor try and get you too. I hate the copy editors.
It's the hardest part. Yeah.
But Anna's commenting in here about she always wondered why they spoke French at her court. So she was that was a really interesting tidbit that you gave her there. And Anna does have another question. Even though the sisters were spread out in age, did they keep in touch writing letters, and were any of them close?
Oh, Maria Carolina and Marie Antoinette Maria Carolina loved Marie Antoinette and kept in touch and wrote letters, and Marie Antoinette was not a good letterer. Her sisters were much better educated than she, only because I actually think Marie Antoinette probably was dyslexic, or she had really trouble reading. And just like her father, neither of them scholars, they had trouble reading, they had trouble writing. So their language skills weren't great. Maria Christina, the older one, who was her mother's favorite and was the governor general of Hungary and Austrian Netherlands, she was a fantastic letter writer. She wrote to everybody. She kept after their mother died, she kept the whole family together, just writing letters and visiting and making sure. Maria Theresa wrote so many letters. We were talking about what happens is that Maria Theresa knows Marie Antoinette at 14 is not ready to be Queen of France. So what she does is she sends her away, and she's going to do some long distance parenting. That's what this was. It's like sending a kid to a boarding school for high school, but you're going to make sure. And what she does, she sends with a spy, an ambassador, but he's there to spy on her. He just writes her every single day. They write back he writes what Marie Antoinette is doing. And then mom writes the letter saying, you shouldn't be doing that. And that was like years and years of this. So everybody did stay in touch.
I love that.
There are all those, just to interrupt a little bit, there are all those really great sections of the book where Maria Theresa is like berating Marie Antoinette for like not being sexy enough. Like, why can't you seduce your husband? Why have you not had a child yet? You are the queen of France. Like, and I'm just like mortified. I'm like, what's going, like, oh my God. And so like it's no wonder Marie Antoinette, got a
after a while, you got to pick your battles, especially with a teenage girl. You do not, you have to just make sure you can't do everything, because they're just not going to listen to you after a while at all.
Yeah.
Well, and Brandon, you guys were talking about how Brandon makes up his characters and Nancy, your characters are, but it's like, this stuff is better than fiction. I mean, this is.
I never, when I knew Brandon was, when you accepted it, I'm so grateful to you. I was so happy to meet you. I actually had a dream where I tried to write a story like you did. And in my dream, I'm going, oh, this is terrible. Just stop. Stop. Go back to whatever you should do. Because for me, that would be very hard, because I have the best material in the world. All I have to do is describe it.
It's like stranger than fiction.
I mean, it truly is like even Tolstoy could not invent a Frederick the Great. We didn't
even give a real flavor for him. Frederick the Great is some of his great lines. Of course, he's gay and his father makes him get married. The first thing he does is write the next morning to his sister. He goes about his wedding night, thank God that's over.
Okay.
He never talked to his wife again.
So Maria Paul has a question here. So you've written about many powerful women who stood in the shadows of famous men. Was Maria Theresa, much like Catherine of Medici, maybe different in some key ways as she held power? I loved how she immediately cared for her subjects and they returned her affection quickly.
Maria Theresa was a much better ruler than Catherine de Medici, and she was a ruler in her own right. I mean, Maria Theresa had several big problems, and the number one problem that she had was that she was intolerant of religion. She was a Catholic. She believed everyone should be Catholic. You couldn't hold a position in Vienna or in the imperial government if you were not Catholic. She wasn't good to Protestants, and she was horrible to Jews. She didn't kill them, but she wanted to get rid of them, or she made them pay high taxes. This is a big black mark against her. Okay, that's Maria. But that's really the big black, and other than that, she did just about everything right that I can think of. Catherine de Medici arranged for her daughter to marry was a Catholic, arranged for her daughter to marry a Protestant, had everybody come to a wedding, and then murdered the whole groom's side, all 700 of them. So that is a whole different kind of a ruler. She was not a good ruler, but she was powerful. But she was, that was the Game of Thrones wedding. That was Catherine de Medici. So.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
it was absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, I mean, and that's the thing I think, Nancy, that you do so well is, and Brandon, you brought this out in this conversation, is how you bring these people back to life in a way that we feel like we are like, oh my God, at the edge of our seats. And so kudos to you on that, because some history, we all remember those history books that we read as kids, and, it's just like, and what you do, everybody in school should be reading these. That's how it should be. We're running out of time. I want Brandon, you've been a fan of Nancy's work for a long time, so I'm going to close out with you asking the final question.
Oh my gosh. Well, yes, that is
pressure.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, Nancy, as you know, I'm a tremendous fan. I love your work so much. And so I guess I wonder, like, where are you taking us next? What is
Give me
next?
a break. I just finished. My husband, during this, while I was writing this book, I had to work so often. My husband said to me, I don't really I want you to know, if I have to divorce you, I will do it with regret, because, it was an all-consuming, but, I'm sure you feel that way when you finish your work. You're just completely exhausted, yes. Right? You got oatmeal for brains after a while.
Yeah,
it's so interesting. Sometime we'll have to do a conversation, because to go from what you did in science to writing, that's a really interesting story, I'm sure. So I would love to hear that sometime.
Oh, yeah. So is where you're taking us next vacation? Is that what you're saying? You're taking a nice
I'm researching, but
that person hasn't quite spoken to you yet, who you want to write about.
Well, me and your other many, many fans can't wait to hear what that person has to say when they whisper in your ear. Thank you so much for letting me do this comment. It was so thrilling.
So great.
It's my honor, believe me.
And speaking of Brandon, what are you working on next? Are you working on something, and when could we look forward to that?
Yeah, I'm working on a novel, and it will be out, I'm told, sometime in 2023, 2024, something like that.
Good for you.
Another novel. Oh my gosh, it's such
Is it done?
It is. I finished a draft of it just a few days ago.
Congratulations! That's the hardest thing. Yes.
Yes, yeah. We're gonna really have to get that coffee sometime, Nancy, so we can commiserate about the oatmeal brain. But yeah, so another novel coming out soonish.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
All right. Well, Nancy, for anybody who's here in San Diego, Nancy is going to do an event at the Coronado Library, a luncheon event. And I want to say it's around the first week of November. We'll have it on. So if you want to see Nancy live in person, check out our website or the Coronado Library website. And there's a chance to have a luncheon with Nancy there in November. So yay. Brandon, thank you for your time. This was a wonderful conversation. Nancy, thank you as well.
Thank you.
And we're going to say goodnight. So when I close this,
hi, everybody. I miss you.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.